answer. Okay, we should probably get started here. I just would like to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for making the time and your commitment to be here today to join us in exploring emerging strategies and trends in volunteering. We will be sharing a few valuable information here today. So we will be recording this session just to make it more accessible for people. And we'll be uploading it on our YouTube account, which we will be sharing most likely within a week after our session today. My name is Ezra, and I am the Community and Volunteer Facilitator, the Volunteer Center Facilitator at KCR Community Resources. And I have Myrna co-facilitating with me remotely today. Myrna works with KCR on a contract basis, both in immigrant services and also in community services on the Project 55 project. Good morning, Josh.
Morning.
And just before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are and we're meeting in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Okanagan Siouxsie people. I'm very fortunate to be able to live, work, and engage in this land today. And last week, the past couple of weeks actually, it's been very, very sunny, and it just makes me, it evokes this sort of feeling of hope. I know that it's quite an extended spring or extended slide into spring, but we were on a lunch walk a couple weeks ago, and it was snowing. It was one of those days where it was snowing, but it was also sunny at the same time. And there were tulips just on the street, and I was just so amazed. And when we do land acknowledgement like this, we would like to have it as a time for us to really reflect on our relationship with the land, and of course the relationship that we've had with those who were displaced, for us to be able to enjoy the lands that we're on today. So yeah, we would also like to, I'm just going to share our presentation here actually, so you can see who has funded this program happening. One second here. All right. Okay, and Myrna, I believe there is someone.
I just admitted someone.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we would like to say a big thank you first to our funder, the Government of Canada, who is supporting this project through the New Horizons for Seniors program. This workshop is part of KCR's Volunteer 55 project, which is a project that focuses on raising the quality of life for both individuals and the community at large by encouraging those ages 55 and better to share their skills and time through volunteerism. And Myrna, would you like to say a few things about yourself before we get started?
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Just really feel really privileged to be able to work with KCR and work with Ezra on this program. I have coordinated the Volunteer 55 program for, I think, 3 years now. I don't know. I can't keep track of time very well anymore. Yeah, I'm just excited to be here and love to work in this community. And I'm grateful also to live on this territory.
Thank you. Since it's a fairly small group today, we would like to get to know you. If you could just tell us your name, just so we would have our basic understanding of who you are. Just your name, the organization that you're working with. We'll try to keep it as short, but also just for us to get to know each other in that way, I guess.
Okay, I'll start. My name is Lori Stokes, and I'm with Ozanam Recovery House. I just am going to start their volunteer program.
Who would like to go next?
I'm Sheila. I work with the Regional District of Central Okanagan. I am their volunteer coordinator, and I just started with them in June.
Hey, I'm Josh Raphael. I help run an organization called Implicit. We were incorporated May 10th last year. So we run social and cultural events in the city. And as well as programs here.
I'm Stephanie Babchuk. I'm a part of Food for Thought Hope for the Nations. And I just joined yesterday with them. So
Wow.
yeah, all kinds of fun.
Yeah, so I'm Chloe and with Hope for the Nations, but specifically Food for Thought.
And I'm Paul Clark from the KLO Neighborhood Association. We do a festival in the Andozi area once a year, and we certainly harness volunteers to do some of our work.
And I'm Karen from the Westside Health Network. I'm the volunteer coordinator. And yeah, good to see all
Hi,
of
Karen.
you. Hi.
Good to see you again. It's Myrna.
I'm Ken Czar. I'm with Volunteer Services here at Kelowna General Hospital.
I'm Debbie Kanak, and I'm the other volunteer coordinator at KGH.
Hi, Ken and Debbie.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dorothy Burker. I work with the community services team at KCR Community Resources as well. And I'm really glad to see everyone here engaging and trying to ensure that we are moving our volunteer programs forward. So looking for lots of great dialogue and ideas today. Thank you for joining us.
Jennifer, there seems to be two Jens here today.
I can introduce myself. Sorry, I'm late to the meeting. Had a few emergencies and things that were urgent. My name is Jennifer Bulcock. I'm the YMCA. I'm from the YMCA Southern Interior BC, and I'm the volunteer engagement manager for the Y.
Great to see you, Jennifer.
And I'm Jennifer Paquette with BGCO Okanagan, specifically the Justice Program.
Did I miss anyone joining remotely?
Oh. Oz, who just came in, maybe?
We're probably gonna give Ross some time to get settled in. Okay, Ross.
Oh.
Alright. It's great to see everyone here today. Thank you again for committing your time and being here with us. We're very excited to be sharing all our learnings with you. And we're gonna get started with Myrna, just to tell us a little bit about KCR.
Hi, everyone. So a little bit about KCR, for those of you who don't know about us, I think that most of you do. KCR Community Resources is located downtown Kelowna and serves the central Okanagan and beyond. Our mission is to foster diversity, collaboration, resourcefulness by tailoring services to meet needs of families, individuals, and the community. We've got 4 departments. Employment Services helps unemployed and underemployed individuals identify career goals and education goals and helps them navigate their job search. Community Services, that's who Ezra and I and Dorothy are here representing today. It promotes community information, support volunteers and volunteer management, and hosts learning opportunities like this one. Family and Adoption Services provides supports and program referrals to individuals and families with young children. It also facilitates the legal and emotional process for adoptive parents and birth parents through the adoption process. And lastly, Immigrant Services. They assist immigrants to Canada, help feel welcome by providing information and connecting them to community, and promotes the benefits of cultural diversity in our community by coordinating cultural awareness activities. Okay. And let's move the next slide. Are there any questions before we move on? Ezra, can you help by moving my slide? I can't seem to do that.
There we go.
Thank you. So to begin today, we would like to acknowledge all the incredible work that all of you have undertaken through this challenging last 3 years. Some of the ground rules around volunteerism have changed during the pandemic, but what has not changed is that overall people are generous and understanding, and that you as organizations are innovative and resilient. Many older adults use volunteerism as a means to avoid social isolation, and for them this time has been particularly hard. And we know it's been challenging for organizations as well. The pandemic has created a systems change that can be a chance to revisit and rebuild within our organizations. Right now is the perfect time to explore new ways to work alongside volunteers, have those tough conversations with boards, staff, and volunteers, revisit and revamp all aspects of the volunteer journey. And it's also a great opportunity for us to make changes we were maybe even looking at before the pandemic. It's important to keep in mind that we're all learning as we go. So this workshop is designed to support you in your work and hopefully inspire you to take a deeper dive into the topics that we'll be covering. And we've included some additional information to support that. We encourage you to get to know each other and provide support to each other, maybe even look at some potential partnerships. So today's material will focus on age 55 plus volunteers, but it can be applied, the information can be applied to any age group. So we're going to look at existing trends and existing and emerging trends in volunteerism, look at some recruitment strategies around diversity, looking at micro-volunteering, our wonderful tool, Volunteer Connector. We'll look at engagement through inclusive volunteerism, talk about some orientation training, wellness and safety, and touch on our Volunteer 55 Ambassador Program. So we're excited about the wide range in types and sizes of organizations represented here today. A little bit of housekeeping, we will share a copy of the slide deck with you after by email after the workshop. We're going to take a quick break at the midway point. And we ask that you use your mute feature when not speaking. And please try to use the chat feature to answer questions or save them to the end of each section. Ezra and I are going to try to remember before we move on to the next section to ask if there's questions. But yeah, we hope we'll be able to do that most times, but please jump into the chat if there's something you'd like to ask us right away. And if we're not able to answer the question, we will get back to you. And alternatively, we may reach out to you as experts in the field to help with questions during the workshop. Any questions about that? It's hard, I can't really see, you guys are small on my screen, so if I miss a hand up or something, please just let me know. Okay, let's get started. Oh, can you move the slide, please, Ezra? Oh, back one. Thank you. So here are some of the current and emerging trends and issues in volunteering that our research has uncovered. We won't have time to go into depth with all of them. Some we will explore here today, and others we encourage you to explore on your own. So it will be no surprise to any of you that 65% of nonprofits are experiencing a shortage or reduction in numbers of volunteers. This is according to a November 22nd Canadian survey on business conditions. Informal volunteering and grassroots volunteer groups have increased. This, of course, benefits the community needs, but yet can challenge some of the formal volunteer roles as some volunteers have been making that shift. The cost of living could affect donations and volunteer time. So we all know that organizations' costs are rising. And we're hearing that some volunteers may have less free time due to extra work pressures as a result of taking on extra work just to get through right now. Staff shortages could mean more work shifting to volunteers, and something we should keep an eye on. And some volunteers may welcome this opportunity, but for others it could be overwhelming. Okay. And next, oh, good. So some of the trends we will talk about in some depth today is remote work and virtual volunteering are here to stay. There is a need to understand volunteer motivations and redesign engagement models using inclusive practices. Micro-volunteering, both virtual and in person, are increasing. Staff and volunteer resiliency, health and well-being are a definite focus for not-for-profits right now. And diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, practices are even more important now. And next slide. And so for those of you who like their statistics, whoops, that's a hard word to say this afternoon, depending on where you are. According to the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions, in the fourth quarter of 1922, 42% of not-for-profits reported increased operating expenses, yet 73% reported that operating incomes are unchanged. 54% reported challenges in recruiting and retaining staff, and 65% reported a shortage of volunteers. 42% of volunteers aren't able to commit to long-term at this time. But I want you to know that there's good news. So Volunteer Canada is working closely with the federal government to gather data and to identify and address ways to re-engage volunteers of all walks of life. They state there's a need to identify and address hidden barriers. And they're currently going across Canada consulting with communities. And the goal of this is the formation of a national action strategy on volunteerism. Are there any questions about these issues and trends before we move on?
Perhaps this is also something that you are experiencing in your organizations right now. Like, do you see any of these trends to be present in your organizations?
And we hope to be able to help you out with some of these during today's presentation.
Well, we will move on to recruitment. We're very passionate about in talking about this today, just because with the trends that we are seeing, it seems like diversity in our recruitment it's something that is very much needed in this moment in time. And also it's something that we all sometimes, most of the time, struggle with. And just before we get deeper into recruitment, we need to ask ourselves, before we begin the process of recruitment, here are just some of the few questions to ask ourselves. And I'm sure this is something that you've probably done. You've this year, a lot of you here today are familiar faces, so you're not very new to this process. But this is just to help you really identify who are your ideal volunteers, who are your potential volunteers. Like it's important to spend some time and effort identifying your potential volunteers and looking at what you have in place, like what your volunteer pool is right now, what consists that, and asking yourselves, are there new types of volunteers that you could be reaching out to? And if there are, where will you find them? Are they going to be coming from the general population? Are you targeting a specific skill?
Very sensitive.
Or are we targeting a specific generation or age group? Having these explored before you start recruiting can help you better understand and also set a framework as to what your volunteer pool will look like. And as Myrna had said, diversity, equity, inclusion is something that's very much on trend right now, and there's a big significant emphasis on diversity. Most organizations don't want volunteers to be a homogeneous group anymore. They want to reach a variety of people as volunteers and donors and other supporters for that matter. But when we talk about volunteer, or when we talk about diversity, what do we really mean? Diversity means understanding that everyone is unique and recognizes their individual differences. These can be along the dimensions of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, abilities, religion, political beliefs, and other ideologies. So when we talk about diversity, sometimes we have this idea that diversity is seeing different colors, right? And that's it. But it really encompasses all our different identities that we bring into a group, we bring into our organization, and it's all these other dimensions as well. And when we talk about diversifying our recruitment pool or diversifying our volunteer recruitment, what does that mean? Or why is it important to do that? And these are just some of the reasons why it's important. First, it's for the purposes of a larger volunteer pool. So when organizations actively recruit from many communities, they increase their volunteer pool. And people often feel more welcome at an organization when fellow members reflect their backgrounds or ideas. So hiring diverse volunteers can invite more people to consider working with you. And diversity can then increase your volunteer pool even further. By extension, a larger volunteer pool also creates a larger donor pool. First, many volunteers become donors and vice versa. Second, when potential donors recognize your commitment to diversity and inclusion in your volunteer organization, and because there's so much attention that goes into that right now and interest, they may be more likely to give. And third, you could also be eligible for more grants that prioritize diversity at volunteer organizations. Second would be more comprehensive range of skills and talents. So a volunteer database or a volunteer pool that's made up of a range of people from different backgrounds with different life or lived experiences is also, it also means a program that's packed with a range of talents, skills, knowledge, and perspective. A diverse workforce means that a volunteer program can adapt and grow to reflect all these different perspectives. In addition to making the most of an existing volunteer workforce, volunteer programs with a wider range of diversity will be more attractive to new talent or people who have a variety of skills. As people from a range of backgrounds look for volunteer opportunities, they will certainly, studies are seeing that a lot of these volunteers would usually choose organizations that have a track record of showing diversity and inclusion. Improved community outreach and cultural competency. A cultural competency is very crucial in any organization that serves people from different cultural backgrounds. In fact, seeing in Kelowna, we're very much there's a lot of our immigrant population, our newcomer population it's large in Kelowna and in central Okanagan. So this is very much crucial in making sure that we're culturally competent, and having volunteers from diverse cultures can improve awareness for your whole organization in general. When your volunteers and staff encounter people from different backgrounds from their own, they'll be more equipped to understand each person's needs and be able to relate to them. And in turn, team members with diverse backgrounds might better understand and respond to community needs, improving your community outreach. Personal experience helps volunteers recognize community needs better than outsider with limited firsthand knowledge. Some volunteers, and I'm finding this a lot, especially in our immigrant services, some volunteers who speak another language allow allow them to communicate with constituents in their language too, which provides a sense of comfort, I see, and some belonging as well. And seems to be playing with our computer or our screen here. Higher impact. So with more opinions, perspectives, and to leverage, a diverse volunteer workforce is more likely to offer innovative and creative solutions to fulfill your organization's mission. In addition to people contributing unique ideas, responding to others, they also learn from each other. So this increased cooperation among your volunteers lead to a motivated and goal-driven volunteer workforce. Understandably, though, with more innovation, with increased productivity, and more skilled, diverse people in your workforce or in your volunteer pool, volunteer programs with a more diverse and inclusive workforce tend to generate higher impact in the community. And this rings true because a lot of the times the volunteers, the diverse pool of volunteers that you have represent the community that you're also serving, generating a higher impact, of course. So just a few strategies that we found in diversifying, of course, your volunteer pool. And this is where we'd also like to get your input. First is to target your recruitment strategy. So our goal is to recruit a volunteer base that is representative of the entire community. Organizations are very much encouraged to target and recruit specific diverse communities based on the demographics of the populations that are not currently represented in your events or in your outreach efforts or in your volunteer pool in general. So that's why at the very beginning, we had all those questions for us to assess who do you have now and who do you not have? And what can this look like for you? So communities in focus, when we talk about them, it could be the Asian Canadians, the Asian Canadian communities, or it could be the Pacific Islander communities. It could also be the African Canadian or Black communities in Kelowna. We've also got the 2S LGBTQIA+ communities, the Hispanic or Latinx communities, and we've got generational communities. So we've got the millennials, centennials, the Xers, is that how you say it? The boomers. And so there's a lot of communities in focus, and this is one thing that you need to really assess to see where you need to focus, like which communities are you needing right now. Once communities of focus are identified, developing relationships is a crucial first step. This is where knowing your community connectors come in handy. Am I the one leaving the slides here? I'm so sorry.
It might be timed. You might have it automatic.
Right. Oh, I got you. Okay. So a part of targeting your community strategy, sorry. We're just gonna make sure that it stays here. That's okay. Okay. So a part of that strategy is identifying your community connectors. So what do I mean when I say community connectors? Community connectors are key leaders within the community. So they are essential parts. They are an essential part of recruiting within communities of interest, as they are generally well connected and are able to open doors to different groups or organizations or populations with which we wish to engage. Connectors can generally speak to the target group's motivations and interests and are able to mobilize individuals within the community. So when considering targeted recruitment within the population in your community that is underrepresented in your organization, consider identifying and engaging a community connector. So when we say community connectors, what would that look like? It could include first existing volunteer leaders and connectors that you already have. These connectors generally know a lot of individuals in their community. So those who are already volunteering for you, and those who are already engaged in activities or events. So those are the ones that you want to talk to. Second, we have our corporate connectors. Corporate connectors are leaders from corporations within the community that employ a large number of individuals. So for Central Okanagan, we have the TELUS Community Ambassadors. Or when we talk about community connectors, let's not just focus on big or large employees, but also our small business owners. What about the local business owners in town? I'm sure they would have a network of volunteers who could connect with them. And that could be a start of a partnership as well. And third, we have the faith-based connectors. A lot of the times we go to churches for volunteers, and they're very much willing to volunteers their time. I'm seeing a lot of our volunteers, especially in my program at KCR, are those who are coming from a certain church. So for the faith-based connectors, leaders within places of worship or faith groups, the faith-based community is important to many of our communities of focus, and many individuals have strong ties with their faith locally. So these are just some of the community connectors that I could think of right now. But if you have any more, please feel free to put them in the chat. We just have. Oh. Is everyone able to hear us still? So after identifying your community connectors, it is equally important to explore or assess your recruitment method and literature. So if you want to reach a diversity of potential donors, volunteers, and other supporters, and especially if you want to target certain demographics not reached by the internet, and there are people not reached by the internet, by the way, you must use some traditional tools for outreach, such as the TV, the radio, the newspaper. We have a few resources for you later on with that. And if you want to reach a specific cultural group, for example, people with a particular heritage, then you have to know how members of that group get information. What communities of faith, so churches, temples, mosques, etc., serve the community that you want to reach. Have you tried reaching out to the Okanagan Sikh Temple and Cultural Society? Have you reached out to the Islamic Center? And these could be options for you right now to reach out to, and finding out if there's a newspaper or a certain type of communication that caters specifically to these groups. Are there any annual events hosted or hosted by or focused on members of this community? So these are things that we need to ask ourselves in terms of really diversifying where we're recruiting and who we're recruiting. And neighborhood associations. So these groups that you're reaching out to, do they have their own chamber of commerce or business association, neighborhood associations, or civic clubs? What about a cultural center focused on people of a particular heritage? You could always make use of Google. Google, I find, is very helpful. And we also have our Central Okanagan Community Information Database for these types of information. And that is something that is being coordinated and managed by KCR as well. So all the information that you need around the Central Okanagan can be found there.
What was that called again, Ezra?
It's called Central Okanagan Community Information Database. It's just our community information database. And another thing that you could utilize this job for, or this task for, is for your volunteers. So this would be a terrific task for volunteers, for them to put together sort of where to find these groups of communities or resources just for these communities would be a terrific task for them. So another place of that you could be attending, or another event that you could be attending, would be the Okanagan Volunteer Fair, and we will tell you more about that later on. But
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Can you hear us?
I've lost my audio.
Would you like to check your speaker to see if Can you hear us, Marta? Can everybody else hear us?
Great.
Okay. All right, it seems like you are. Okay. So Okanagan Volunteer Fair, another great resource for you to go to get volunteers. We'll tell you more information about that. What about trade and professional associations, unions, civic associations? Is there a membership of one of these groups made up of demographics that are underrepresented among your volunteers? These groups may be happy to have a speaker from your organization, just to make a brief presentation focused primarily on volunteering, or an item in their newsletter. So when you're reaching out to these groups, it really takes that first step to build that relationship. And you could be completely honest with them. You could say something about, we're wanting to see more of the Hispanic or Latinx members in our volunteer pool, so we're reaching out to you. And if they're unable to help you with that, for example, you could ask them, because if they are unable to provide volunteers, I'm pretty sure the chances of them having a network to help you with that specific question is very, very high. So just be completely honest with them in creating that relationship and what you're looking for, what you're expecting. There's a lot of associations or clubs within our schools. You could reach out to high schools, and they're a very great demographic to reach out to, just because they do have I think it's a mandatory requirement for graduation a lot of the times for our high school students. UBCO, it's called Get Involved UBCO. You could reach out to them as well. They manage the students, the volunteer opportunities for students, and they're a great resource to reach out to. Okanagan College, they also have a volunteer center. I don't have the contact information for that, but if you just Google it, they'll be able to give you information about that. So, and if you're wanting to target like a specific cultural or ethnic group, for example, UBCO and OCU they have a rich resource for those types of communities. Yes, Jennifer.
When you're talking about groups for volunteering at the university, there's also post-grad. So anybody involved, any organizations that have children, anybody wanting to be a teacher have to take volunteer hours to get into their post-grad or master's. And also on the health sciences side with physiotherapy. So there's groups of those people also looking for volunteer hours in the community.
Hey, thank you so much. I hope you were all writing that down. That's a great tip. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it. On my way, comment in the chat. Oh, and Dorothy.
Sorry, and I think there might have been a question in the room, Ezra, but I couldn't hear it. Was there somebody that asked a question in the Bertram room, or no? Okay. I just wanted to mention with all of these, whether it's a diverse participant or it's an accountant or anything else, that we need to recognize that we're making sure we're not asking somebody with sort of the premise of, we know you need to give volunteer hours and reducing them to that, but actually looking at them and to help identify is to say, yes, okay, here's a cultural organization or here's an accountants association, but then looking at the pool of people and saying, these are the skills that we're looking for, and we see you have these skills. So really, it's still asking a human being to be a volunteer for your organization and not reducing them to an identity, whether it is female or anything like that. Just as a word of caution to always remember, humans are at the center of volunteerism still, right? Thanks.
It's a wonderful reminder. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And it's really centering around the person first, right? And so on top of all of those, we also have other nonprofits serving diverse communities, connecting with them. And we have been holding the Nourishing Volunteer Managers, and we've been seeing a variety of organizations who serve different diverse communities who you may be able to connect with. We've got some youth groups as well, some sports organizations, language classes that you could reach out to, and women and minority owned businesses as well. Like when we talked about the corporate connectors that we have, those could be considered as well. And it could also be as simple as just paying attention when you watch and read the news, or just walking around the neighborhood and paying attention to signs and posters. That could be a great resource as well. And again, just to do your research, do as much research as you can. And also just being mindful about the fact that just sending an email to these groups may not be enough to get volunteers from the group. You will have to build trust, build that connection, and they will have to hear your message multiple times, it seems like, not just once. And those face-to-face meetings, on-site presentations, and maybe even display booths at events can be really valuable. Diversifying volunteer roles.
I don't know, but I saw the list of people that's already confirmed. And that was like last week. I don't know who else has confirmed it.
Roz, you had shared something, but I didn't seem to catch it.
I think Roz just had somebody come into her office and she was on unmute.
Oh,
She wasn't muted, so she was having a conversation in our office if somebody came in or something. So I don't think it was directed at you, Ezra.
Yeah, sorry, I've got a few things on the go here, so I'm just muting and but I am listening. Thank you.
sounds good. Okay, so just moving on to diversifying volunteer roles as well. So as you're putting together volunteer roles, it's important to consider offering a range of opportunities. And this could include short-term or long-term commitments. It could be high or low-time commitments, so 2 hours a month or 1 day a week. Physical labor or computer-based tasks, just making sure that that's available as a volunteer role. Virtual or on-site opportunities, just being flexible with that. Customer-facing or behind the scenes. Outdoors or indoors, skilled roles and general roles. And we find that having a system in place for volunteers to try out different roles before they commit is another great way to encourage volunteer diversity and also boost retention. And just a few considerations when we are looking at our recruitment strategies. And this is something that was also highlighted when Myrna was talking about the emerging trends in volunteerism right now. First would be the impact of socioeconomic status. So socioeconomic status is one area where organizations specifically want to improve diversity. One's socioeconomic status can present an inherent barrier to volunteer opportunities, and those who struggle financially may not be able to volunteer for unpaid positions. And this is something that we all have to be really mindful of. Those who work several jobs to support themselves may not have the time to help. And when we engage volunteers who may be experiencing hardships in that way, a few steps can make volunteering more accessible and worthwhile for them. You could consider providing childcare. For example, free childcare at volunteer events may allow working parents to participate, or even better, family-friendly events can involve kids of all ages and their parents to also participate. Transportation reimbursements. Providing travel reimbursements can help volunteers access more opportunities. So maybe it's an option for you to consider providing bus fares to make it easier for volunteers to get to an event or to your office. You might also organize ride sharing or carpools among your team members, but you have to be really mindful of this just because of the liabilities that come with it. Free meals. Everyone appreciates food and snacks at a meeting or volunteer event. And from those, for those volunteers who this may be a strong motivator for, it's quite important to have this available for them. So if you're recruiting from a population with dietary restrictions, you also have to be mindful to try your best to provide food that meets those needs as well. And this is, of course, considering your budgets and working around that. And outings. So many of us in the social impact sector give volunteers tickets to sporting events or theater performances or other events to say thank you. And these perks are especially meaningful for volunteers who couldn't otherwise afford them. And it just works on for volunteer retention as well. And just a few considerations in terms of barriers to volunteering. So besides the socioeconomic barriers to volunteering, people from diverse populations can face many other obstacles. Various groups can face different hurdles. So for example, older adults may not have the physical ability for active volunteering roles. Single parents may struggle to find time to help, but having background checks could be a barrier to volunteering. And we recognize the importance of background checks because it is necessary to protect your staff, volunteers, and also the people that you, or the communities that you serve. But many of background checks services may be a challenge to receive for non-citizens. And so it may be valuable to consider if some rules don't require background checks or if there are any alternative ways that you can conduct background checks when they're necessary. And a lot of the times our immigrants or our newcomers to Canada who come from other countries have been vetted extensively. So that may be something that you need to familiarize yourself with or just need to be mindful of. We just have a few moments to check here. Mobility, COVID vaccinations. Yes, those are really good points as well. And it's really how we're approaching those situations. Have you had experiences in those, Ken, if I may ask, if you're on the spot? And how you sort of overcome?
Yeah, so the reason I put those in is because that's exactly what we're going through with mobility, because we work with people that need assistance, right? And so if that person or volunteer that wants to be in a wheelchair is in a wheelchair, pardon me, it's really hard for them to escort folks around. The other issues were COVID vaccinations. The Interior Health has a strict policy about people coming and volunteering or working on site. They have to have COVID vaccinations. And so that could be a hurdle for those that aren't, they're anti-vaxxers, so to speak. And the other thing I mentioned was the aggression. Sometimes people have history that maybe doesn't go through the criminal record check. Obviously, they haven't had a record, but we had one gentleman that kind of went through the squeaked through the system, and then our security pointed out that he'd had some aggression issues here at the hospital, so we couldn't, I mean, we're a bigger area, obviously, so that may not happen to smaller people like you guys, but for us, we see that in a bigger and more frequent situations.
Yeah, so being mindful of some of those barriers is quite important. Yes, Josh.
How do you define aggression?
That is a really good question.
What's that?
I just think it's really important because anyways, I'll let you define first. I'll give more of my feedback.
Okay. Well, does anyone like to answer? Would anyone like to answer?
Ezra, I'm not sure if we could hear Josh clearly for the hybrid people.
How do you define aggression?
How do we define aggression?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can only speak to our setting, and that is, he was in a mental health unit, and our RCMP were called in a few times for physical altercations with staff and other patients. Again, it's privy to the unit, but when he wanted to volunteer with us, we didn't have, of course, that information, and so we're looking at possibly, having information for us when we have people that are wanting to volunteer, if they've had past situations where it's been a physical altercation. And in our setting, it could mean verbally abusive. In other words, threatening, shouting, swearing. So we have a fairly wide range spectrum as opposed to other. I don't know what other places accept as aggression, but here it could be even just a verbal threat. So that's my definition, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Ken, and I think it's also fair that we have to consider it, Josh, around vulnerable populations, right? And so if somebody has concerns, or if an organization has concerns around somebody's ability to manage their emotions a little bit, that's not a great place to place somebody that's already in a vulnerable position. Right. And so we really have to be mindful of that, because ultimately our role is to protect our participants and the people that we serve in that sense too. Right?
Mhm. And just to add some of my thoughts on this, I do feel like Canada itself is a very polite, non-confrontational culture. So sometimes I do think there's cultural differences, even for myself in the way that I communicate, can be a bit more forward and direct. And I think understanding those cultural differences, that we're coming from different places with the verbal, threats and aggression and verbal shit like shouting and stuff. I do think like that's just aggression, but I think sometimes there's disconnect from someone who could be from a very different culture, who comes in and they start like, they're just used to talking in this way. And this is how you solve problems in their culture. And that's not how we solve problems necessarily in Canadian culture. I do sometimes think there's a disconnect, and then there's like it doesn't necessarily get resolved. So just like, I think to me, just understanding that, really having a clear definition of what aggression is. And you can feel threatened by someone's actions, but it's not necessarily an aggressive act. They just need to communicate with you better and understand you better, if that makes sense. I just think there is sometimes a disconnect with that.
I think it's a great point to bring. Sorry, Ken, if I could just, it's a great point to bring up, but I think the onus, again, because we're all volunteer managers in this room, right? The onus is really on the volunteer manager program to ensure that there is a level of diversity, equity, and inclusion training for your team as well. Because if you are inviting diverse people into your organization, you also need to ensure that you're providing the training for everyone, including the volunteer and your staff team, to understand each other and to build communication skills that allow for that cultural difference to come forward, or understanding around if somebody has accessibility or mobility issues, that your team, if it were to come into play and they can't do everything that an able-bodied person may be able to do, that your team understands accommodation is about seeing beyond one identity in somebody and really identifying that they may be in a wheelchair and so they can't do this work, but they excel at this work, and having that appreciation and understanding. That's our role. That's making sure that we've provided the environment that allows diversity to thrive.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, Ezra, just because you've been facilitating, so you haven't had a chance, but Myrna has an issue with her audio. And so I think Myrna's going to talk about micro-volunteering, but when we get to that point, we're just going to take a break at that point so that we can try and get Myrna back up with her audio. And so if you just prepare for your slides, Ezra, and then that micro-volunteering, for everybody to know, that's when we're going to take a little bit of a break.
Sounds good. Okay, just to sort of finish up with the barriers to volunteering, and we really do appreciate the inputs when it comes to the aggression and just inclusive language in that, and effective communication. One of the other barriers that I was going to say here is language barriers. Is English the primary language of all your volunteer programs? So when we talk about orientation, training, is that sort of the primary language that you have on your written handouts or even your presentations? So that's definitely something to consider and think about. Is it possible for you to incorporate some of the other languages to include more people from your community? And it's important for you to also take a look, or it may be an option for you to take a look at your existing staff and volunteers and their language capabilities, and sort of incorporate that the different languages in your volunteer programs to make them more inclusive. It could be an option to also offer an on-site translator or a different language options for your digital learning materials or your written learning materials as well. there's a few barriers in organizational policies as well. So some organizations may have volunteer policies that exclude specific populations. So do you require a minimum education level for some of your volunteer opportunities, a minimum time commitment, or some other rule that may hinder people from giving their time? So in order for us to create a more inclusive and diverse volunteer program, your policies must let various people qualify to be able to help or support or to serve. So it may be an option for you to consider revising some of these policies to be more inclusive of people from varying backgrounds with different abilities or different capabilities. And we also saw a lack of experience as another barrier for some of our volunteers. While skills-based roles are attractive or very interesting to some people, they may present barriers to others. So creating worthwhile opportunities for varying skill levels may be something of value, and also considering skilled positions that also offer mentorship and training. So having people who are skilled in one area train and mentor someone who may not be skilled in that area. So these roles sort of remove skills barriers and can even turn into like a motivating factor for some volunteers to stay. And we just wanted to speak just a little bit about Volunteer Passport. You may be familiar with this already, but this is an idea that was recommended by British Member of Parliament Danny Kruger. And it's really just to help all social impact agencies to find a way of working together to recruit and share volunteers. This may be a new concept for a lot of us here. I'm not familiar if organizations are adopting this volunteer passport yet. But it is really just, so basically it does include a volunteer's basic information, their training and qualifications, background check status, date and reference numbers, character references, and a list of organizations that they have already volunteered for and in what capacity. So it's practically just like a passport, but for volunteers. And the aim of this is to really just save time for volunteers and also organizations by avoiding duplication of effort in areas such as background checks or facilitating training, as well as providing a better volunteer experience by ensuring that volunteers have to provide less information, and they may be able to avoid, again, duplication in training. But this is something that may require a much bigger conversation or a much bigger framework for you to adopt. But it may be something to look forward to in the future as we head on. And I also wanted to just let you know about, just before we go on break here, just let you know about our Volunteers for All program. And I'd like to I'd like to make you aware of this, because this is another great opportunity for you to recruit. So the Volunteers for All program is a unique matching program that offers you one-on-one support, that offers volunteers one-on-one support in connecting them to the right opportunity that will help them on their journey to volunteer or even to find meaningful employment. So it's open to everyone. What it is the program coordinator helps the individual find or create a goal plan and find a meaningful volunteer opportunity across the Central Okanagan. So the coordinator will be with them every step of the way. And it's also significant for organizations because they're getting vetted participants already to go into that organization. So it's a program that's being coordinated by KCR. And if you'd like to hear more about that, we can talk more at the very end, and we'll tell you more at the very end as resources. But just before we go into micro volunteering, this may be a good time just for us to like stretch a little bit, use a bio break perhaps, and just for us to figure out the technology here that we're experiencing. So we'll give you 5 minutes, stretch out, enjoy the muffins and the loaves that we have there. Got some drinks as well. And Myrna, no.
You're just gonna hop off and hop back in, Ezra. Ezra, can you make me co-host? Ezra, can you make me co-host, please? Can you make me co-host, please? Myrna was afraid to step out and I would ask her to make me a co-host but she couldn't do it, so. That way, when she comes in, we can try and help her. I can try and help her out a little bit more.
I'm not sure what's going on with the presentation. Why it's changed.
Hi, Joshua. It's nice to see you. It's Dorothy.
We have to head out, but thank you so much for having us.
Well, it's recorded, so it may
Okay.
be available.
Okay.
To them too, but
So Chloe, before you go, sorry,
Yeah.
I was just going to mention the nursing for volunteer managers. I'm not sure if you normally attend, but we've postponed it from next week to the 28th.
Okay, good
Okay,
to know. I
so
think
you
I
should
got an
get an
email
email.
about that today.
Yeah, it just went out today, so
Okay.
it's for
thank
everybody to know too.
you.
It'll be a great conversation. It's with Susan
Okay.
Byram, who's with First West Foundation, and talking about how to engage corporate volunteers and trying to get away from the sort of corporation asking you, how can you use 10 people at one time, but having a conversation about how to have them be adding to the services that you need. So
Okay, thank you.
thanks, Chloe. See you later. Myrna, can you hear us this time?
I can hear. Oh,
Thank goodness. So sometimes, Myrna, it just happens that the speaker may go, and then oftentimes it's like rebooting your computer. Coming in and going out is one way to try and fix, but I know you were concerned about the co-hosting and
yes.
that, so.
Okay, excellent. What a relief. Ezra, okay,
Yes.
sorry to, because Ezra, have I got you? Yes, so we're about half an hour behind at this point.
Okay,
So,
I'm going to cut some of mine.
can you say something so I can see if I can hear you?
Say something. You want me to say something?
Okay, good. I can still hear. Let's not have me as a co-host, but I'll need to rely on you to advance my slides though.
Okay, that works.
Just in case that's the problem, the co-hosting. I don't know. But I mean, I use Zoom almost every day, but this is the first time I've had this. So that's odd.
I'm gonna try to share the screen again for this one. I think it is timed, but I don't know why it keeps moving.
Yeah, it's very odd.
I'll cut the remote control.
That's right. Maybe that you have it set to advance on its own. And so
It just might be super sensitive too. Because you are always close to it.
I'm trying to look at the slides, the Google slides, and if it doesn't seem to have like a timer on it. So hopefully the same.
The snacks look good.
Got some banana loaves and mixed muffins
And apples, the apple's good.
and apples. Yes.
Apples are good.
Myrna,
Good
would
to
you like
know.
Would you like to start?
Sure, we're ready.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Micro-volunteering. Micro-volunteering can be a path to recruiting new volunteers or reaching those ways. It might even lead to more regular commitments down the road, and sometimes these volunteers become donors. Of course, it has its challenges. It is not an option for some roles. So by definition, it's a small bite-sized volunteering with no commitment to repeat, with minimum formality involving short and specific actions that are quick to start and complete, also known as short-term or episodic or project-based. So many micro-volunteering opportunities are offered online for convenience purposes, but that's not to say that all opportunities have to be digitally based. For example, you can just as easily offer a 1-hour in-person shift as well. Micro-volunteering has, the following characteristics. It involves small increments of time. It's easy to get started and do. It's quick to start and complete and requires minimal planning. And sometimes no formal agreement between organization and the volunteers needed. Although I would suggest that's probably wise to enter into an agreement with any type of volunteering role. And it can be off or repeated, or online or offline. There's actually lots of options. Next slide. So many traditional in-person roles can be made micro by adapting existing opportunities. Consider breaking up or chunking them, typical roles, into more bite-sized pieces, and explore this possibility with roles that people have found maybe too demanding in the past. Be open to volunteer-generated ideas, talk with existing volunteers, and talk to potential volunteers too about what their thoughts are. What sort of volunteer is it perfect for? Anybody that wants to give volunteering a try or learn about your organization, but their time is limited. For example, busy students, working, non-working parents and grandparents, people with other caring responsibilities, and anyone else who is working or just has other commitments and not a lot of time. Decide what to call it. You may not want to advertise your micro-volunteering opportunities as micro-volunteering. You might wish to call them something like micro-actions or micro-tasks, any term that you think might engage your audience. The language you choose to use internally may be different from how you advertise it. Labeling it micro-volunteering internally will help your organization to differentiate between other roles. But whatever you choose, make sure that it's very clear and people know what to expect from this type of opportunity, and so that volunteers aren't disappointed. And most importantly, it's important that you take the time to create meaningful micro-volunteering opportunities. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, in the interest of time, I think we're going to skip over. We're going to have a exercise, a little sort of 2 to 3 person per group, and look through some of these suggestions that you see on the screen. But what I'm going to encourage you to do is, if you're interested in micro-volunteering, take these suggestions, take them back to your organization, and take a look at, can you make it micro? There's lots of great ideas out there, and I hope that you give this possibility a try. It could really be a great recruitment and engagement tool. Any questions? Okay. Now we're back over to Ezra.
Awesome. That's very quick, Martha. Yes, so the volunteer connector, just for the sake of time, I'm just gonna show you what it looks like and what sort of it offers for volunteers and also organizations. There are a lot of ways of exploring volunteer opportunities in the central Okanagan, but one excellent way to find volunteer opportunities is by using an online volunteer recruitment platform. And we've been seeing a trend in using these sort of platforms and finding volunteer opportunities that are available in the community. And I'm just going to show you what it looks like. I'm just going to share my screen here just to give you a little bit of context as to what that would look like. So this is what the volunteer connector looks like for a volunteer. This is what they see when they first open. This is the landing page for when they first open the volunteer connector. So the volunteer connector is a digital platform that connects engaged community members to volunteer postings a lot faster and more conveniently. So when you are landed on this page, you're actually being a volunteer. It makes it easier for you to look for opportunities because you can tailor your search results, such as causes that you're passionate about or activities that you'd like to do. You can tailor your results through those, and also tailor your results through your location, or if it's something that you'd like more flexibility in, so you could choose a one-time only, short-term, long-term commitments, and also opportunities that may be available virtually, or that may be good for youth or for groups or for families. So it's very much it's made to be very user friendly for a lot of our volunteers. And for organizations, this is a great way for you to recruit your volunteers, because once volunteers create a profile, you'll be able to see all the information about them. And when they click, for example, they click on your posting, it's as easy as clicking at the Apply Now button. And you are actually able to, this is more of like a very organized way of seeing volunteers. And I know some of you may be using a different platform, but this is, again, just resource for within the central Okanagan that you may be able to utilize. And just for the sake of time, I'm not gonna tell you a lot about it, but if you're interested, I'm very happy to set up a meeting with you one-on-one just to get you started if you don't already have an account with the volunteer connector. Stop sharing there. And while we're on the topic of virtual volunteering, I'm going to share our screen again. Sorry, one second.
Thanks, Ezra. Slide 18 we should be on. Is that where we are? No. Okay. So virtual volunteering. So it has recently become popular with many of us. It's not a new concept. The practice of virtual volunteering to benefit nonprofits dates back to the early 1970s when Project Gutenberg began involving online volunteers to provide electronic versions of artworks in the public domain. Through a 2021 Volunteer 55 survey of older adult volunteers in the central Okanagan, we heard that 72% said they would be comfortable volunteering using a digital device. One tool to support volunteer engagement could be to provide free or low-cost resources to older adults to support their digital literacy. While many are adept already, older adults are reporting they need to keep up with the pace of change in this area, and I'm one of those, actually. So any educational resources I can find are very welcome. And so we've included some of those at the end of the slide deck that you will be receiving. There's a whole slide with specific educational opportunities for older adults. Of course, there's lots of great programs that can be accessed in person by your volunteers as well. The same Volunteer Canada poll that's referenced in the slide indicated that benefits of virtual volunteering has included an increased flexibility in volunteers. This could open up opportunities to include volunteers who don't live in our community, those with diverse abilities, and those not available during traditional times. Since the start of the pandemic, there's been a significant increase in technology skills for both volunteers and staff, especially for people 55 and up. Another benefit to virtual volunteering is an increase in new volunteers joining organizations, which of course can lead to an increase in capacity and impact for your organization. Another potential benefit is saving on operational costs. In this time of possible return anxiety or time constrictions of volunteers, this can be a great opportunity to adapt our volunteer programs to either strictly virtual or building a hybrid model to use now and beyond, because it looks like virtual volunteering is definitely here to stay. A good place to start is to decide what aspects of our work can be done that way. Who will need access? How can the role be done differently in a remote capacity? It's important to gather all the resources that are needed, determine what formats. So would the virtual position be ongoing, short-term, episodic, on-call, micro? Just consider creating different position descriptions, one for virtual, one for hybrid, and one for just return in person. And a position description should include all the support so that volunteers feel confident. They know that they're going to have all the tools that they will need. They will be provided by you for them to come back feeling kind of, empowered, informed, and safe. And also leading the exploration of virtual volunteering could be a role for existing volunteers. And that could foster repeat engagement and support and making volunteers feel really valued. So I know that many of you are engaged in virtual volunteering within your organization. And this slide really just speaks to, suggestions to revisit it. That's always important, whatever we're doing. Regular consultation with current virtual volunteers is crucial. And there's some tips on managing virtual volunteers on the KCR website. That pamphlet could be really helpful. So there's just some questions here for you to consider, take back to your organization. And so are there any questions about virtual volunteering? Or any comments?
What are some of the positions and some of the jobs that some of the other organizations are using virtually right now? Because I can only think admin is kind of what I'm thinking, but are there any unique or I'm just looking for examples, I think.
Sure. Anybody?
We have a research team that staffs our volunteers, so a lot of their data entry done through them at home. They don't actually have to come in and volunteer. They can do a lot of their help with the research on their own computer. So that's what I would consider part of that.
Other examples? what is working in your organization? Oh, go ahead.
I've seen some IT opportunities as well for organizations who need volunteers in that area.
And I know there are a lot of organizations that in the past were connecting, particularly with isolated seniors or those with diverse abilities, who are doing it in person, now are using telephone or, through video chat as well. And it certainly has its challenges, and it's not for every role, but really taking a look at how we can adjust some of the roles might be a good re-engagement and recruitment tools for us.
Josh, you had a question.
I have the same question, what the really was.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Was that a question? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, my question was already answered.
Oh, great. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right, so now that we have explored ways to sort of diversify our recruitment efforts and your volunteer pools, let's put diversity into practice. And this is where inclusion comes in. And we're going to be talking about, we're not going in depth on inclusion because inclusion in itself is a large topic, but we just like to, our focus for this sector of the presentation, and just give you some strategies or some best practices that we thought we would share with you today. But when we talk about inclusion, it refers to the behaviors and social norms that ensure people feel welcome. It means that in a work environment, all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully. They all have equal access to opportunities and resources and can all contribute fully to the organization's success. So inclusion at its heart is ensuring everyone feels welcomed, valued, understood, and part of the team. But what does inclusive volunteerism look like for a lot of us volunteer managers and for us who work in the social service or social impact sector? Inclusive volunteerism or fostering inclusive volunteerism really starts with you. So recognizing biases, stereotypes, and work systems that are present within your organizations. And when we say it starts with you, that's with the recognition that we all hold biases, and it's typically the unconscious biases in particular that are the underlying attitudes and stereotypes that we unconsciously attribute to another person or group of people that affect how we understand and also engage with these people or groups of people. And when we say recognizing biases, being aware of these unconscious biases can reveal attitudes and stereotypes that we may not be aware of. And it's really just to realize that these biases or these implicit biases are part of regular life. And it will take some mindful attention to recognize and address them when they arise. And Josh had raised such a good point about cultures. And the whole concept of cultures, it's so elusive. It's such an elusive concept. And when we also talk about biases, we have to think that we also hold cultural biases. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's not isolated within the countries we're from, but cultures that or communities that we're part of, our lived experiences. It's a culmination of all these that create all these biases that we hold. And it's really just taking intentional steps in recognizing these biases and stereotypes that we hold. That's very important. And also recognizing them in work systems. While there are steps we can take as individuals, it's important to name the systemic policies and actions sanctioned by your organizations that can be deemed as oppressive or that can be deemed as exclusive or not inclusive. And it's really asking tough questions with compassion and focus, and being compassionate with yourself. It's really identifying those biases, but also being compassionate with yourselves when you do. And we can also talk about, when we talk about inclusive volunteerism, we talk about accessibility, providing accessibility and inclusive best practices in our organizations. What does this look like? So it could be as simple as, or not, well, not simple, but it could be removing barriers to recruitment. And we've mentioned a lot of these barriers to recruitment earlier. But one way to understand your volunteers' personal barriers is it could be an option to send out a survey to gather information about any accommodations volunteers would require. And once you understand your volunteer specific needs, you can design your program to be more accommodating or to be more accessible, to be more inclusive for these participants. It could also be in terms of video transcripts or captions. And these are all just accessibility options that you can provide, or you can try your best to provide for your volunteers. Certain volunteers are better at grasping audible information through captions and transcripts, so this could be an option. Text alternatives for images, and also being aware of different learning formats. So I think there's the auditory, tactile, and visual learners. Being aware of those and creating a framework, creating a program that incorporates those learning formats or learning styles. Training materials in multiple languages. This is very important again. And also flexible training opportunities. And we've spoken a little bit about virtual opportunities earlier. And that is that is a way of making training opportunities flexible for people. We can also talk about, when we talk about inclusive volunteerism, we have to really be mindful in creating accountable spaces. So what do I mean when I say accountable spaces? Creating and sustaining an accountable space means holding responsibility for yourself, holding responsibility for your intentions, your impact, your words, and your actions. It may mean entering a space with good intentions, but understanding that we all screw up, we all make mistakes, and we need to be able to accept responsibility for those mistakes. And when we talk about creating accountable spaces, and in this journey, in this whole DEI journey, we're not all starting from the same level or from the same space. We have to be really mindful that we are all in these different stages in this journey, and acknowledging that, or placing the trust in those that we share the space with volunteers that we share the space with, acknowledging that their intentions are good, but we are all in the process of learning and growing, and that making mistakes is part of how that happens. And an emphasis in really committing to enter a space and committing to align your intentions with impact. So placing an equal amount of responsibility to behave equitably and also inclusively. And just to go over effective communication here very briefly. When we talk about effective communication, we all know that the essential communication is very important in creating strong relationships in all areas of our life, but most especially with our volunteers. So it's very important to stay connected with volunteers at all stages during our plans for your program, your volunteer programs. So regular and clear information during stages of planning, taking time to ask for and consider volunteer input. And this could look like a volunteer newsletter for your volunteer program. We've been hearing a lot of positive feedback around volunteer newsletters from other organizations. Also providing alternative ways to contribute in community, again, providing those flexible opportunities. Providing resources for volunteer health and wellness. We're going to talk more about that later on. And also communicating new plans and rules gently. So those are just some tips for effective communication. And I just really want to spend some time in inclusive language. Language is, and as we sort of touched on earlier, how we define things could be different based on a lot of things, and language itself, it evolves over time. And when we talk about inclusive language, there are a few practices that we can adopt into our programs or even into our lives in making sure that our language and the words that we say, again, is taking that accountability part of it, knowing that words matter in a lot of the situations that we're involved in. And when we talk about inclusive language, we can start with acronyms. So acronyms can easily become a part of organizations' language and vocabulary. However, they can quickly become alienating for new employees or new volunteers or external partners. So if your organization chooses to actively use acronyms, remember to introduce and intentionally remind those in conversations and even in onboarding processes, that this could be something that you want to incorporate into your onboarding. So just staying away from acronyms, or if you can't, making sure that you're clarifying it with people, with your volunteers. It's the same with jargons. Be sure to deculturalize your statements in conversations with people in your workspaces and in your communities. So, and this could be as simple as using simple language. I just recently found out, I was reading an article about how simple language can be inclusive language. So a lot of the times, if we're working with diverse volunteers and you see a language barrier, it's taking that step to use simple language that could be really inclusive for those types of situations. Now, let's talk about gender inclusive language. So gender inclusive language it's terms that are used to be more gender equitable. So we're so used to addressing people as guys or hey ladies, hey gentlemen, and things like that. And those may not be representative of everyone in the room. And I'm very guilty of this as well. I'm just so used to saying hey guys or hey boos or hey bros or something like that with like my friend groups. But as language evolves, we have to be really mindful that we're not excluding people when we say those things. So a way to sort of eliminate this or to address this would be using gender inclusive nouns for general use. So saying everyone or everybody or distinguished guests or folks or friends or even humans. I do like using y'all in some situations. But this is really just making sure that everyone feels safe and acknowledged in that way. It could be in more formal situations. We could also use gender inclusive occupational nouns such as chair or chairperson, congressperson, or members of Congress, first year students or first years, or just things like that. And when we're describing a specific person, it's also important to be mindful of someone's pronouns. And this is something that has gotten a lot of momentum and a lot of attention over the years in the past few months specifically. And we share our pronouns because for the longest time, gender and gender expression has been understood as binary. But recently, the concept of gender has moved away from the binary and is now more clearly understood to be fluid. So with this fluidity comes the understanding that the pronouns people identify with are no longer just she, her, or he, him. It's no longer that heteronormative way or the binary way of she or him, but it can include pronouns such as they, them, or sie, zir, amongst a lot of other pronouns that are present nowadays. Is there a comment that I missed? Oh, okay. So introducing yourself with your gender pronouns is a great inclusive practice that moves away from assuming someone's pronouns based off the way they look or based off the way they express themselves or even based off the way they sound. And this is a really important practice, especially if you're dealing with with a diverse group of volunteers in your organization. And I see this a lot, and we see this a lot too now in our email signatures, in our business cards. And also just being mindful of this, and this could happen a lot too, like when we're emailing, we're basing it off of the names, right? If it's sort of like the male given name or a female given name, we sort of just automatically assume. But being more intentional in using gender inclusive pronouns, such as referring to someone who you have no idea about, or who you have not met, or who you're not sure about their pronouns, just using a more gender inclusive pronoun such as they, or just things, just those little things can make a huge difference in a lot of ways. And I just wanted to speak just a little bit about person first. So person first language, and this is this recognizes that a human is first and foremost a person, and I really appreciate when Dorothy had said this, especially with our volunteers. And when a lot of the times, a lot of these words that we use, such as addicts or mentally ill or disabled people, they can be quite exclusive, and they can be quite oppressive in a lot of ways. And really just changing or shifting that language into identifying the person first, as opposed as their experiences or their what am I trying? There's a term that I'm trying to find, but whatever experiences or whatever lived experiences they are, whatever disabilities they have, it's not their whole identity. So having this person first language identifies them as first and foremost a person. So changing it to people who are experiencing homelessness, or people who are experiencing substance use abuse, or people who engages in a type of work, for example, or people who use wheelchair as opposed to saying wheelchair bound, or just using the term person first, or person who has experienced this, or person who has been impacted by this. So you're not just isolating them to this sort of identity, you're not reducing them to that identity.
We also learn this too. So if someone, for instance, you have to disclose that someone is diabetic, for instance, saying, Johnny has diabetes versus, Johnny is diabetic. Like for some people, the specific, like it changes how they are viewed or how they view themselves. So
absolutely,
some people might mind and others may not, but usually, like for instance, we try and say the diagnosis is always secondary to the person's name. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing, that was actually what I was looking at.
Yeah.
The diagnosis is secondary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Okay. Any comments on that? Any questions, perhaps? Got some more.
I think I really like that too, because it kind of takes like the idea that this person just decided to become, they decided that they wanted to be addicted to drugs.
Right.
When you call them that, it's like, yes, they aspire to that. It's like, if you said this person's a doctor, not going to be like, how dare you identify me as a doctor, right? So I think it's really important, and I think it changes the frame of how we see people and gives a broader scope of people's experiences in the community and the world, that this may be something about them, but it doesn't define them. So I do like that a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times it evokes this when we say addicts, right? Like it evokes this type of mistreatment or just treatment towards that group of people that we're describing. And so, yeah, it takes away their humanity. So,
yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about orientation and training. And we're just going to go through this briefly, just because for time's sake. But why do orientation? So orientations explains the relationship between the volunteer and organization, whereas trainings provide specifics to the volunteer about their role within the organization and the details or expectations of their position. When we talk about orientation sessions are important. They're important in welcoming and informing your new volunteer base, and it's often one of the first impressions that people get of your organization. So making an effort to plan and practice the material you will deliver will have such a huge impact on volunteer recruitment. And the importance of holding orientation sessions or information sessions cannot be, it's a way of welcoming potential volunteers, but also publicly reinforcing your commitment to diversity and inclusion. And there are just 4 types of orientation here that we've listed. We have the cause orientation, which answers the question, why should I join this organization? So with sharing this information, your volunteers will have a stronger sense of commitment to the organization and to the work they do. We have system orientation. How will I be volunteering here? So system orientation addresses how the volunteer will be working with the organization by providing general information about the organization's facilities, equipment, and program structure. Social orientation, how do I fit in? So it really allows the volunteers to meet the people they will be working with. So this includes current volunteers or also staff members. And finally, the position orientation, which provides specific insight into the role and the role's impact. So make sure to outline expectations and boundaries of the position when you're talking about position orientation. Content of the orientation, we're not going to go through all of this, but I just wanted to sort of highlight on your mission, vision, and values component to it. Make sure that you're sharing your organization's commitment to inclusion, as well as any other resources that you have that explain how to get involved in making your workplace more inclusive. So this is really just making sure that you're sharing the resources that are available to all the employees, resources to minorities, as well as resources for allies and how to get involved in making your workplace more inclusive. And also just a note on the program evaluation feedback and additional resources. Just making sure that letting your volunteers know that they can express their comments or concerns regarding their volunteer experience is very important in getting feedback. So providing them with different methods of communications or any comments or any concerns would be really important. And also just program evaluation. So orientation, as we'd like to see it, it's sort of ongoing for volunteers. And so making sure that there's additional resources, or making sure that volunteers know where they can find resources like manuals or how-to guides or job descriptions, either online or in person, it's very important. It takes that extra work, but it will save your organization time when it comes to answering basic questions in the future. And advantages of training, it's pretty much straightforward: getting to know people, the program, the position, establishing expectations, developing skills, ensuring that the volunteer is the proper fit, and just making sure that the volunteer is knowledgeable enough about the tasks that they have. And it's really just a chance to answer questions and create a relationship between volunteers. And just a few training essentials here that I'd like to give to you as well. In a training session, make sure that you will try to impart 4 things to volunteers: what to do, how to do it, what not to do, and what to do in an emergency. So what to do, what's expected of them as new volunteers, what their responsibilities will be, how to do it. It's explaining how volunteers can best accomplish their tasks. And this will probably take the longest chunk of time, but this, just a tip about showing them or how to do things, or in this sort of training, the best way to do this, or an effective way to do this, would be scenarios. So making sure that it could be an option to duplicate what an event will look like and what you expect of them on the day of, or it could be as simple as going around the event location. So scenarios, very important. And just an important reminder as well for what not to do. Like, are there certain things volunteers are not allowed to, such as boundaries for the sake of confidentiality and to keep them safe, and what to do in an emergency. This is very, very important. The location of the first aid kit should be known by everyone, and possibly first aid techniques as well as what to do in a fire, a severe storm, or things like that. And just an important reminder that you cannot accomplish everything in one day, and it's not about cramming everything in one day. It's really thinking about how you can build an ongoing library of knowledge and experience for your volunteers. It's essential for training. Would you have any questions about training and orientation at all?
I think I just feel like it's common, I guess. I feel like it's really important, but I feel like people who often do orientations, it's like either they're the one who drew the short straw, or they're like super excited about all these things they tell you in orientation, and then you point to be like, oh, hey, I thought it was gonna be like this. They're like, So I feel like it's really important in value propositions, and the thing you're saying is that you can actually like back that up and that those things will happen. Just because, yeah, I just feel like a lot of people do not look forward to orientations because their experiences between either things are oversold and people are super hyped up and they do have good intentions on delivering, but they can't.
Right.
Or it's like, yeah, we're doing orientation today. Yeah, it's pretty awesome working. And you're checked out. So I don't know. It's just a comment, but I do feel like it's really important to have a vision and direction when you're orientating volunteers and be like, hey, like, if this happens, then this will happen. And I will back that up. And here are a few examples in which we did it, just because I've been in places where it's much different. So I do feel like it is essential. I just want to just throw out my experience.
Thank you, Josh. That's really
I think, yeah, the other thing is it's humor really does help too, because I find for us, like Debbie and I, we do so many of them, it becomes quite tedious. And so I find just injecting a little bit of humor just for myself so I can actually stay awake. Because sometimes I feel if I'm just droning out all this stuff that I know, it just, if you don't have engagement with people, they're going to be falling asleep. And especially when they shut their computer off, darn well they're sleeping behind that screen. And yeah, we're done. Okay, I know at 10 o'clock I'll get back on there and then say, oh, thanks for the orientation. Darn well they probably had a good sleep. But in that, and I'm not pinpointing the people here today, really. But I'm finding just with orientations, make it interesting for the volunteers too. And we sometimes will see up to 6-7 people per orientation, sometimes 3-4 times a week. Now I'm getting excuses. So for us, it's really hard because it does, you're just spewing out all this information that's important. And so I just find sometimes just to make a little funny little things here and there to see if they're actually listening. Sometimes you can wake them up when you make a laugh or two, but generally it's just, I think what's important here, especially when you're training folks in, what Ezra's talking about, it's really important to keep them engaged, and that can be really tough. I find virtually it's really harder than in person. At least with in person, you can look at people and they can look back at you. Whereas online, it's easy to be distracted, right? So, but we do all ours online. It's just easier.
Thanks, Ben. And thanks, Josh. Appreciate the input. Okay, let's move on to my next piece on the wellness and safety. Don't worry, it's the last piece. So.
Okay, thanks, Ezra. So finding resources, well, one of the things I wanted to mention first is we talked at the very beginning, a couple hours ago now, that there's a trend towards nonprofits addressing resiliency, wellness, and health, both for volunteers and for employees as well. So it's interesting that we just assume that those resources are available for employees. But, our volunteers play such a huge role in helping us realize our missions, that it makes sense that wherever possible, access to those resources is important for them. Obviously, it can serve as a recruitment and retention tool. So if some of the volunteers are nervous about returning in person, reaching out to start a dialogue about their concerns and learn what they may need in order to feel safe, coming back may be a really huge step into getting them back on board, particularly for older volunteers, many of whom report that their concerns about health and safety are a big barrier for them to in person. So in finding resources, if they're not available in your organization easily, that can be challenging. There are some tips you know, in order to integrate some volunteer wellness into your current program, you can partner with another organization that's similar. Maybe put in a request to a funder specifically for wellness and safety training for volunteers. Or another idea is to, you know, get a volunteer leadership team together to guide and find out what resources are out there. And there's lots of free and low-cost resources available to anyone on the internet, of course. But also, we've set one of the slides speaks specifically to wellness and safety and health in the presentation that we're going to be sending you. So please take a look through that. Next slide, please.
She's just away for a second. She's here for a minute.
Okay, well, the next one speaks to the benefits of wellness programs. There we go. So, you know, I'm not going to go through all of the benefits, but you'll certainly have that information when you get the slide deck. You know, it just goes without saying that, you know, having something like that in place for the volunteers really says to them that they are valued, and it may make your organization stand out and make your opportunities more appealing over another organization. Group activities, you know, can really give a sense of connection and greater shared accountability to volunteers that are able to take part in those. And the next one, the next slide. So safety for those of us providing services, including volunteers, is equally as important as safety for the participants or the clients of our programs. Safety includes physical safety, emotional safety, and cultural safety, which of course is something we've been talking about. And there are some tips, there's 6 tips. If anybody can get to the next slide, that would be great. No, back one, or are we on the right slide? Oh, okay, great. So, you know, considering barriers, attention to immediate needs, be very transparent and predictable with volunteers, and respecting boundaries and clarifying roles, extremely important. Clearly outlining expectations from volunteers, and, you know, a real kind of focus on how information is shared and the importance of confidentiality. Yeah, so, you know, please refer to the slides. Do you have any other questions right now around wellness and health and safety for volunteers? No? Okay. Oh, yes.
Provide any supports or more learning materials around these things? Just because I'm in the process of building like a volunteer orientation. So this is great, but is there more?
Yes, so for we actually do have the overview of volunteer management course.
Okay.
It's an 8-week program course that Sheila was involved in last year. And it helps volunteer managers who are into the role. And we are going to be sharing a few resources, but if it comes to safety that you're specifically asking about, there's Jose, who is such a lovely human, did a presentation in our Nourishing Volunteer Manager series, and we're very happy to share a few of the resources that she shared with us as well. But our website also has a lot of resources.
The other thing I was just going to mention, Ezra, is that we are in the process right now of piloting a new workshop called Suicide Awareness as Crisis Response. And I'm looking for a few participants that might be willing to participate in the pilot for that. So we've done one pilot, and we have rejigged some of the curriculum, and then we'll be running another session coming up in April That'll be 2.5 hour workshops. So if anyone in the group is interested in participating, please let Ezra know, and then we'll share the information with you and we'll send it out as well. But it's a really good program that's got a trauma-informed lens, but it's really to help identify if somebody is in crisis and how you might be able to support them. So that could be good learning. Or it will be good learning. It just couldn't be.
Yeah, excellent.
I like humor too, Ken, so.
Okay, just a couple of quick things that, thank you, Ezra. Many of you are familiar with our Volunteer 55 media campaign, where we we interview amazing volunteers. Most are nominated by the organizations. And we feature them in our social media and on the Capital News. We also, many of you too, have allowed us to interview you as organizations, and we feature your work, your volunteer opportunities, your organization, also through this particular program in the Capital News and through our social media campaign. And so if you have volunteers you'd like to recommend to feature, and I'll show you the next slide what that looks like. Or if you would like to have your organization featured as well, please get a hold of Emily at kcr.ca, and she can help get you hooked up. We can do a little interview and make sure that you get featured in our campaign. So, great. Okay, here's an example of featuring one of our volunteer ambassadors. You may have seen this. This is Cleo, who currently volunteers with Lake Country Planning Society and the Lake Country Seniors Housing. So the past slide gives great ways that you can help us share the word. And please reach out to us, Emily at kcr.ca, if you'd like to join in. And another excellent way to recruit volunteers. Many of you are familiar with our volunteer fair, 26th annual volunteer fair coming up, third week in September 16th. So save the date. It's at Parkinson Recreation Center. We usually have 60 to 70 booths. So organizations like yourselves who give information to about 700 people that 800 people that come through that day. It's an amazing event, and we're in the midst of plans, getting all the final details put together. But to make sure that you know all about it, please sign up to our e-blast. You can reach out to Emily at kcr.ca to make sure you get our newsletter.
Yes, and we're just nailing down some more of the details, finer details of this, but we also have the Volunteer Managers Appreciation Breakfast, which is usually the day before that. So it's the 15th of September. And I think we have it scheduled from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. at this moment in time. So that's something to put in your calendars as well, so you don't make any appointments on those times.
Thanks, Ezra. I knew that we were forgetting something about the volunteer fair to share. And that was an important one. Wow. So upcoming at KCR, what isn't upcoming at KCR? Everything up there on the screen. We've sort of talked about the Nourishing Volunteer Managers and overview of volunteer management already. Excellent tools for those, and there's some people on the call are new. Others of you just might want a refresher or haven't been able to join in. So again, signing up to eBlast, make sure you get all of this information in a timely fashion. Any questions about those last 3 slides? No. Okay, excellent. Where are we at? Oh, so we have, we had our contact information up there on the previous slide. And now we have the evaluation form. So Ezra's going to send that out, the link out with the slide and the recording sometime in the next few days. Is that right, Ezra?
Yes, and some resources as well, such as the suicide awareness workshop.
Excellent.
that you mentioned. So
And
workshop-
and at the end of the slide deck, you will see all the resources we kept talking about. There's 3 slides worth. Hope that you find something. But as we're kind of wrapping up, and then Ezra might want to add to this, but we thank you for your time here today and your ongoing commitment to the community. The work you do is just incredible. I just want to leave you with one sort of piece of information or quote, and that's that we encourage you to go out and to promote volunteerism as a way for people to connect with each other again. You know, ideally that would be in person. And I think that a lot of people are feeling disconnected, and a lot of people, particularly older people, use volunteering as a way to connect and stay socially nourished. And so if we can think of promoting volunteerism as a way for us to connect again, I think that might help us sort of get back to sort of the pre-pandemic levels. Not sure that, you know, in person will go back that way, but yeah. So again, thank you today. And Ezra?
Oh, and I just wanted to add as well, a lot of, well, not a lot of you, but you may not be familiar with it, or you may be National Volunteer Week 2023. It's the theme for this year is Volunteering Weaves Us Together. So just adding on to
Ezra for Prime Minister.
Oh my goodness. Anyways, and just a little, just to add a little bit more to what Myrna had said, this year's theme just really reveals the importance of volunteering to the strength and vibrancy of our communities through the interconnected actions we take to support one another. And yes, for Prime Minister. I'm just. But yes, thank you so much for being here today. It's so lovely seeing familiar faces and new faces. I will be sharing a bunch of the information, and we appreciate the input that you shared with us today as well. So great to see everyone. We'll see you on the 28th for Nourishing Volunteer Managers. And we'll see you at our workshops, other workshops as well. So